fostering inclusive development is essentially at the heart of what this conference is about. It's at the heart of what we all care about as Pakistanis living through this era.
Hello.
And it's a delight and an honor for us to welcome two scholar practitioners, people with very sound training in development, in thinking about governance, but also people who've worked at the coalface and have seen the real constraints of policies and what can be done through both practical, bureaucratic, and political constraints. And so the hope here is for us to listen to them on their experiences and then also try and frame what future possibilities for growth and development can be that take all Pakistanis along as we grow. To set this conversation up, let me first, before I do that, let me make introductions, although I believe none are needed. And that cliche stands true, perhaps more so in this event than most. Dr. Sania Nishtar is a member of the Senate of Pakistan. In her role as a special advisor to Prime Minister Imran Khan on poverty alleviation and social safety nets, she led the Benazir Income Support Program and the Ehsaas programs for nearly 4 years. She was a leading contender for the role of DG of the WHO in 2017 and has chaired or served in various global health initiatives at high-level fora, including the WHO, UN, American National Academy of Sciences, and the World Economic Forum, among others. Dr. Nishtar is a cardiologist by training. And Dr. Miftah Ismail has served 2 stints as Pakistan's finance minister, most recently earlier this year. He is PMLN's General Secretary for Sindh and has served as Federal Advisor on Finance, Revenue and Economic Affairs, was the chairman of the Pakistan Board of Investment, and has been an economist at the IMF. Dr. Ismail holds a PhD in public finance and political economy from UPenn's Wharton School. To set this up, before we start, let's just think about where we've come between 1990 in the past 3 decades. Pakistan's GDP per capita has doubled in this time, and yet we have grown much less, at much less pace than our neighbors. And so there is an essential sense of having been left behind on the economic front. We've also lagged behind all of South Asia, with the exception of Afghanistan, on various human development indicators, the entirety of human development indicators, and are, by some estimates, 3 or 4 decades behind the likes of India and Bangladesh on education. Recent work has described how, in terms of inequality, there have been ebbs and flows in how much we've improved, but between 1990 and today, we've not made much of a change to how inequitable the country is. So, specifically in the UNDP's National Human Development Report of 2020, Dr. Hafiz Pasha and his team showed sort of how inequality started to improve in the 90s, but then deteriorated during the 2000s before starting to improve again in this decade. Dr. Ismail, I'll start with you. You've called Pakistan the 1% republic. Can you start by talking about what specific policies and institutions you believe have perpetuated this 1% republic? And then I'll come to Dr. Nishtar after that.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali Hasanain, and I thank alums for inviting me, especially with Dr. Sania Saiba. I've talked about the 1% republic, and obviously मैं अकेला तो नहीं हूँ जिसने ये बात की, और lots of other people have talked about this, and it's not it's not something surprising. We all see this around us. that Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, but especially Pakistan, and I'll only talk about Pakistan, is a very, is a society which is captured by the elite, really is working for our elite, whether it's rent-seeking for businesses, but it's not just businesses, whether it's bureaucracy, businesses, the armed forces, the politicians, the landlords. I mean, you have some groups at the top who control the decision-making in Pakistan, and my idea is that because they're already very rich, there is no compulsion for them to want greater growth, faster growth. I mean, if you make $1 million a month, another $100,000 is not going to really substantially increase your utility or substantially increase your happiness in life. If you made 25,000 rupees a month, and then you were to get another 10% increase to 2,500 rupees a month, that would really change what you could buy or what your children could eat. But if you made a lot more money, you couldn't really, you wouldn't really be so much better off. So if you are a elite in Pakistan, you would want the status quo to be maintained. You don't really necessarily want things to be disturbed. And yet, there is something wrong with what I'm saying, because you see other countries in the world who actually progressed, who've actually developed, where the rich or the elite or the decision makers, whatever you want to call them, have come around, have decided or sued for growth or white for growth, and they've gone for growth. And so you see countries around the world, including in our region, which have grown whereas we have not. And I think that one reason that we've not grown is perhaps the most ineffective governments in the world. Certainly one of the worst governance anywhere in the world. I'll give you an example. I was just talking to Dr. Ali Hasanain, that I've been coming to Lahore for 10, 15 years so often. And this problem of fog, I wanted to drive to Islamabad today, I can't because the motorway will be good. This problem of smog, fog, I mean, it's been there for so many years. And this is the second largest city in Pakistan. The average Lahori loses 6.7 years of his lifespan living in this smog. And yet, though no government, and we've seen many governments, martial law government and Muslim League government and PTI government and all these governments, no government has addressed that problem. We've seen with circular debt. General Musharraf started circular debt, and then PTI came, People's Party came, it increased. We came, increased more. PTI came, increased even more. Now we've come again, we'll leave it again at a higher level. No government has found a solution. So governments in Pakistan are the most ineffective on the face of it. I'll just talk for 1 minute about education. And I was telling people that, Aga Khan University did a survey of kids across Pakistan, 15,000 kids in different grades. And the average math score was 27 out of 100. The average science score was 34. Both are failing grades. Only 1 out of 100 students, 1%, got more than 80 points, which they thought was a good understanding of these subjects. Only 1%. Now, if you think that we spent 1,000 billion rupees, governments of Pakistan spent 1,000 billion rupees trying to school our children. I wouldn't say educate our children, but school our children. The private sector spends another 1,000 billion rupees, if not more. So 2,000 billion rupees, which is a lot of money for a poor country like Pakistan. 2,000 billion rupees, we spend about 5% of our GDP. And what do we get? We get a majority of students, I think 79% students post-COVID, who they say they have literacy poverty or some word like that. Basically, they're functionally illiterate. In 5th class, in class 5 or grade 5, these kids do sums and read or write at the level of a class 1 student, which means that the last 5 years they've wasted in school. If you actually think that the purpose of the ministries of education in the provinces is to educate kids, then you will say, obviously, the ministries have failed. But if you really think about this, and you understand that the purpose of the ministries is to give jobs to teachers and benefit administrators, then you understand that they're not failing at what they're doing. Their budgets goes up every year, everything is okay. This educating kids or schooling kids or keeping them in school and babysitting them, that's just a byproduct. That's just the reason why that is the reason why you can give jobs to teachers. Otherwise, you couldn't give jobs to teachers. And so we're not able to educate our kids. I was talking to Adil Najam Saab some weeks ago, and we were talking about Bangladesh and Pakistan, and he told me that the only difference between Bangladesh and Pakistan is, and Bangladesh is not it's an authoritarian government, a very corrupt government. Bangladesh is not the shining city on the hill, but still much better than us. The difference between Pakistan and Bangladesh is that Bangladesh's population growth rate is less than half of ours. And we produce 55 lakh people, 5.5 million people every year, which is more than the population of Islamabad and Gujranwala, or Islamabad and Rawalpindi combined. And we are not able to educate them. So 1 in every 10 child in the world is a Pakistani. 1 in every illiterate 10 child in the world is a Pakistani. So I have this now, I'll just end this talks up, that I came up with 6 pillars of growth that we need. If you allow me, I'll just very quickly rattle them off. The number 1 of which is population growth. No amount of money that we throw into education or anything infrastructure development will be of any use unless we control our population. Sri Lanka, we grow at 3 times the rate of Sri Lanka, twice the rate of Bangladesh. Then we need to have local autonomy. Our federalism is complete failure. There is no federalism in Pakistan. The people who spend money are not the ones who raise money. The people who raise money give the money to somebody else. They have no budget constraint. They just spend, and it's never given to local governments. And it's just this is just political patronage and nothing else. Then, of course, at some point, Pakistanis have to live within our budget. I see the Deputy Governor of State Bank is sitting right there. And I think he understands this more than most people, that Pakistanis at this point really need to live within their means. We can't just be borrowing money and come up with fanciful exchange rates. And to do that, we'll need to export more. We need to improve our agriculture. And, of course, we'll have to at some point, teach Pakistani kids. When I say this 1%, and if you allow me, I'll just tell you that one way of gatekeeping the elite and to keeping other people out of this elite club is this English language. So that you have to speak English in the right way in Pakistan and all that, and then you can get a job. Otherwise, you can't even get a decent job in Pakistan. We all know that. It's a secret. Let's just, all of us share that, so we don't talk about this, but we know that. So English is one gatekeeping way, but there are many other gatekeeping ways. And I've talked about the fact that there is one school in Lahore, Hasanain College, which in some years have given 60% of your cabinet, half of your judiciary, your Supreme Court. One school in Karachi, which give you half of your rich people in Pakistan. How is that? Of the 400,000 schools, if one school is giving you half your rich people and one school is giving you half of your judiciary, this is not a 1% society, this is a 0.001% society. We are way beyond the elite society. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Great. So I'll come back and explore some of those themes, but let me go to Dr. Nishtar. Dr. Nishtar, if you can just start us off by giving us an overview of inequality, the state of inequality, and also how you see perhaps progress and where from.
First of all, let me thank LUMS for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to come to this seat of learning. I want to thank Ali Chima in particular for reaching out to me. The subject that you have put forward for discussion is a very important subject, inequality. And you positioned inclusive growth as the panacea to address that. And I think as a starting point, I'd like to say that equality, inclusion and inclusive growth are not synonymous, because you can pursue approaches to inclusive growth with a view to narrowing inequalities, but there are standalone public policies that can allow you to narrow inequalities as well, and I think that's an important differentiation to appreciate. So essentially, we're looking at these 2 streams. Now, if you look at inclusive growth, to a layperson like myself, a non-economist, growth is inclusive when broadly it will lead to the creation of jobs and when it will increase wages. If it doesn't do either of these 2, growth is not inclusive. So just let's look at Pakistan's history. We've had 3 spurts of growth in these 3 decades, in the 60s, in the 80s, and then in the 2000s onwards. And I will stop at 2018 so that Miftah and I don't get into a squabble over that. So if you look at these 3 eras, these broad areas of growth, there have been specific geopolitical circumstances that have led to growth, that have led to debt rescheduling, that have led to inflow of foreign funds, of foreign assistance, that have led to increase in the procurement of military hardware, for instance. These periods of growth have had nothing to do with increase in jobs, have had nothing, very little to do with increase in wages. So I wouldn't say that these were periods where Pakistan pursued these transformative policies and catalyzed investment, and as a result of that, and invested in productive assets, and as a result of that, we grew. Or that we invested in science and technology, and there was a correlation of growth with science and technology. That wasn't the case. If you look at investments in higher education budget as a proxy for investment in science and technology, and if you correlate it with growth, there is absolutely no correlation. If you look at the correlation of Singapore or Korea with investments in science and technology, and if you look at the correlation with growth, there's a perfect statistically significant correlation. There is none in this country. So I think all the eminent economists in the room will agree that these 3 transitory spurts of growth that we've had have had nothing to do with focused, inclusive growth policies. Now, we all know that whenever inequality narrows down at a quantum level, there are certain factors at play. And those factors are sustained growth over a period of time, and that happens in a certain environment where governments have predictable policies, when they're very long-term sustainable policies, when there's an overall environment of law and order, security, peace and tranquility, which attract investments, and where an honest redistributive hand of the government accrues the benefit of that growth equitably to populations and ensures economic freedoms. We have not had an era where that has been at play for significant periods of time that have led to growth. So let us agree that we have not had a period of inclusive growth in this country, a sustained period of inclusive growth in this country. And that, of course, has perpetuated inequity. Let us look at indicators. So if you look at the Pakistan Social and Living Standards Measurement Survey, when researchers like us segregate data by wealth quintiles, and Zeba will bear me out, when you look at all the health and population indicators and you segregate them by wealth quintiles, I remember the first time I did that for a Lancet paper, the person who was doing the data analysis turned back and said, have you drawn this, or is this actual data? Because you will see a very statistically significant difference across all the indicators, without exception. And I want to emphasize, without exception, all the social sector indicators, between the richest quintile and between the poorest quintile of income. And of course, Miftah very eloquently described the 1% and the 0.1%, and I think we are moving towards towards the regressive side. But inequality just does not have this income dimension to it. There's a geographic dimension to inequality as well. So in Pakistan, there are inter-provincial inequalities, intra-provincial and inter-district inequalities, and inter-district inequalities as well. So look at the indicators of Balochistan versus Punjab. So a girl who's born in Washuk, for instance, look at her access to clean water, look at her access to to sanitation, access to health, access to education, access to any other service, vis-a-vis a girl born in Lahore, for instance, or compare the indicators of Peshawar and Mohmand districts, or for instance, neighboring Badin and Karachi, or even within Karachi, between the different sections of Karachi. There are glaring disparities, and I needn't go into the details of that. Balochistan, for instance, has the largest population area, but 14% of the road network, 4% of the electricity. You look at the indicators of the newly merged districts, appalling when it comes to every metric. So I don't want us to think that inequality just has this income dimension. Inequality has a very significant geographic dimension. It has a gender dimension, and I'm sure you've had a detailed discussion on that. And it has a very important rural-urban dimension in our country. If you look at the Pakistan Social and Living Standards Measurement Survey data and just pick up water, accessibility to tap water, for instance, and track it from the first PSLM to the most recent PSLM, which is what I did most recently, and you will see that accessibility to tap water in the rural areas has hovered around 13 to 14%. It's a straight line. And accessibility to tap water in the urban areas has remained within 50%. So the trend lines are just horizontal across these 3 decades. It's appalling and unacceptable. So the inequality glares at us, and it's not that we do not have data. If I can spin a trend line, I'm sure those in the Planning Commission can do that much better than me, but there's no accountability for action on these glaring inequities. Now, I said in the beginning that inequality is not just related to growth, and that inclusive growth is not just the only intervention that you can have, inclusive approaches to growth as a way to address inequality, that there are other public policy interventions as well. So if you look at these broader inequalities that I talked about as the context, what could be a few examples to address them? And I was thinking about the examples to highlight as I was driving down here, and I thought perhaps let me start with the National Finance Commission Award. Pakistan's National Finance Commission Award gives 82% weightage to population. But there are many other countries with some comparable parameters. Neighboring India, for instance, attaches 10% weightage to population. Mexico has a very progressive formula. South Africa, likewise. But Pakistan is totally wedded to population as a metric of deciding where the money should go, which basically explains why the newly merged districts, partly explains why the newly merged districts are the way they are, and Balochistan is the way it is. Of course, there are enormous security challenges and a number of different considerations that interplay, but that's one of the important factors. More significant than the National Finance Commission Award is the Provincial Finance Commission Award, which does not exist. So many of us who have worked at the federal level and have never worked at the provincial level are actually not aware that this huge amount of money that the federal government passes on to the provinces, and Miftah and I have both served in the federal cabinet, we know that the federal government starts with a minus 600 billion. That is the budget that we start with. Because it was negotiated long time ago, the 18th Amendment was negotiated long time ago, without the accountabilities, without the conditionalities that should have been part of that package. And once you transfer the money to province A and B and C and D, not many of us are aware that the respective chief ministers are absolutely at liberty to decide where the money has to be spent. There is no semblance of a Provincial Finance Commission Award, despite it being articulated in so many policies and norms. They have a complete free hand to give money to their own constituency, to their own constituents, for causes that they think are important. And evidence and data have very little interplay in that. It is completely unacceptable for this one individual to have so much power, There's one individual to have so much power to decide the fate of hundreds of billions. That is how it is. And that partly explains why the difference between Muzaffargarh and Lahore, the difference between Badin and Karachi, the difference between Bajaur district and Peshawar and Mardan. So I think these two things are really illustrative of some of the things that we can do as public policy measures, which are rooted in law, which are articulated in norms. It's just a question of political will to implement them. The other thing is, of course, and Miftah talked about it as well, the volume of subsidies to the tune of, according to some estimates, to the tune of 2.2 trillion, that are subsidies that are totally untargeted in a number of different sectors, and who benefits from them. I'm sure you know much better than I. So the point I'm trying to make is that there are standalone interventions that you can make, and of course social protection falls within that bracket. I didn't want to talk about it up front because I don't want you to think that is the magic bullet. It is one of the different approaches, and social protection, of course, has its own different flavors and its own different target audiences and its own different approaches. But it's one of the many things that you can do that promote equality, that are aimed at building the bridge and narrowing the gap. So let me just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. So, Dr. Ismail, it's interesting to me that both of you have cited the lack of decentralization of both tax collection and expenditure, and the processes and the sort of political decisions not being decentralized, or the bureaucratic decisions not being decentralized also. I'm trying to think of ways to, policies that we can think of that might be compatible with both inclusion and development. If we consider just our neighborhood, both China and India have pulled 1 billion people out of poverty in the last generation, or since about 1990. And both countries' income support programs have come after the first spurt of development. You spoke earlier about decentralization as one of the things that we need to think about, but can you flesh out a bit more for us what a right growth model might be?
Okay. Thank you. I agree with Dr. Sania in what she said about Pakistan not having inclusive growth. My only thing is that I think all growth or natural growth is actually inclusive growth. If the economy grows, other than, for instance, let's say that you do a war for some other country and that country gives you $5 billion, and then just the elite keep it, and that. Other than that, any growth that you have, any economic growth that you have, economic activity you have, will have to have new jobs, will have to have social mobility. So all growth is good, but her point is very well taken and valid that when we are going for growth, we are not particularly thinking of inclusiveness. We are not thinking of this to be a widespread growth. But nonetheless, I think that all growth is good. We've talked about, and she and I actually have dealt with this, so we both, I think, understand this, that this year, for instance, the federal government was going to give 4,300 billion rupees to the provinces. The provinces in the last 10 years have increased their payroll by, I think, 500%, or something like this. Some ridiculously large number, and so you are giving this money to people who have no responsibility to raise money. I don't know how federalism works if you're not also responsible for raising your money. I think we should give them the right to tax a few more things. Sure, raise your own tax, but then first discipline would be to make them raise their own tax. The second discipline is that you give them to the local government and not to provincial governments. And so if you have, like in Pakistan, for instance, 150 or so district governments, and they're all competing with each other, and there is this Thibault model, Charles Thibault came up with in the 1950s, I think. That was my first lesson in local public policy. Ali Chima is smiling. But so there is this TIBO competition that, that different districts will compete for property taxes and for other things, and you will finally see an effective government. The way we have set up governments in Pakistan, there is absolutely no decision-making that happens. Seriously, I've seen really wonderful people who are bureaucrats in Pakistan, wonderful people who are politicians in Pakistan, wonderful people in the military, but the total is less than the sum of the parts. Nothing happens. I've worked in Punjab once as the head of Punjab's Board of Investment, and I saw some of the finest bureaucrats you could find, and yet really nothing happened. And that sort of has always surprised me. I've talked about this, that why doesn't anything happen? And I still do not know why the government of Pakistan's governance model is completely ineffective and completely one of the worst models ever. But I do know that it is. I do know that when we are able to when half of our Pakistani children are out of school, when 60% of Pakistanis have income, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, of less than 40,000 rupees a month, household income rate, 60% Pakistanis. If you look at these data, you're just flabbergasted that how poor are Pakistanis. When you have tap water going to less than 25% of population, then obviously the governments are ineffective. So we have to understand that. So what sort of growth works for Pakistan? Any growth works for Pakistan. Any growth works for Pakistan. At least start growing. And I'll just say this. We have in Pakistan what I think in 1970s they used to derisively call in England producer socialism. Socialism for the benefit of those who produce it. So PIA is not running for the benefit of Pakistani consumers. Because you can fly Air Blue, you can fly Sareen, you can fly Jinnah, or whatever other airlines at the same price, slightly better service, much newer aircraft, probably even safer too. But PIA is there only for the benefit of the people who work for PIA. SNGPL is there for the benefit of people who work for SNGPL. The fact that sometimes you get gas, sometimes of the year, you should be thankful. Seriously, the LESCO is run, and I've been on either side of the table. LESCO is run for the benefit of those who work in LESCO. The fact that you get power, you should be grateful for that. So Pakistan has this kind of socialism. Every time you talk about privatization, somebody will accuse you. I'm not looking at Sania here, but somebody will accuse you of stealing. When I was a minister recently, the UAE wanted to buy some shares from the government of Pakistan on a buyback basis. If the government of UAE is coming and I came to Lahore to meet with the delegation and I said, give me deposit. He said, we're not giving you deposits. Sell us something. I said, shares. He said, fine. So we'll buy you. And I said, what if the market goes up? He said, on a buyback basis. I said, fine. If we are selling shares to UAE, we were trying to sell shares to UAE on a buyback basis. Even then people are saying corruption ho jayegi. How? Is it the buyback? You can always buy it back. And do you think the UAE Amirs actually want to do $50 million of corruption in Pakistan? Really? Is that what they want? And this is why I'm in public service after so many years. I just to try. So we have these wonderful people, but nothing gets done because there are accusations, there are this and there are that, but there is much more than that. Pakistan is not underdeveloped or non-developed because of NAB and because of accusation. There are significant other issues as well. But the point is that, we can't privatize anything. You try to privatize and there are accusations. But as long as you have a large footprint of the government, because our government is so ineffective, our growth cannot be sustainable. So we need to reduce the footprint of the government. Yes, the government should be bound to provide education to every child in Pakistan. Absolutely, that is this job. Whether it's through a voucher, whether it's through direct cash transfers, whatnot. That is the government's job. Yes, the government should increase this BIS payment or Ehsaas payment or whatnot to more poor households and increase the stipend too. That should be the government's job. But we really should not be running airline and losing 55 billion rupees a year.
Dr. Miftah started sucking the soul out of every room he's in after he's left the ministry. every column.
He had this line prepared, man.
But Dr. Nishtar, your views on why things aren't working?
So the first time I worked in the government was back in 2013. I was in an interim government for 3 months, very briefly. First time from the civil society, working in the government. You have lots of preconceived notions about how the government functions. And I had this immersion experience, and when I came out, I wrote a paper which was called Reflections from My Tenure as Minister. You can still Google it. And in that, the crux of my findings were that when we set up government, we do all the process-related things, key appointments, cabinet, prime minister, all the appointments and all. But the things that actually matter for any organization's performance, and the government is no different from an organization at a mega scale, which are performance, accountability, the right incentive structures, and by incentives I don't mean remuneration. We just don't focus on them, and we actually get them skewed. So my bottom line was that we actually set the government up to fail. We actually set the government up to fail because we're not focusing on the attributes that will make it work. And that there are core distortions by virtue of which corruption and collusion becomes institutionalized. And that corruption and I wrote in that paper, and the Lancet editor called me and said, are you going to live in this country? Are you sure you want to write this? I said, yes. And I said, corruption is not an exception. Corruption is the norm. So what happens? You have institutions where there's very weak governance, where there's very weak commitment to conform decisions with evidence. And in that environment, you've created a culture where there is wide discretion, arbitrariness as the default, no accountability, and you incentivize bureaucrats with political leanings. So what are you actually doing? You're actually making a witch's brew. You're actually making the perfect recipe for disaster by incentivizing the bureaucrats to have political leanings, by rewarding a culture of arbitrariness, by making sure that there is very little meaningful accountability, and there's a shocking tolerance for failure to comply with norms and procedures and policies. So as a minister, you can do whatever you like. As a bureaucrat, you can do whatever you like, unless somebody pins you down because of a politically motivated difference. If you dismantle something that is good, I don't know whether Miftah agrees with me or not, if you dismantle something that's good, if you don't espouse a policy that is right, if you don't take a decision at the right time, and these periodic crises that we step into, the urea crisis, the sugar crisis, the wheat crisis, the gas crisis, these are shortcomings of decision making. When people come at the last minute to the cabinet and say, kal ye karna hai, aur agar nahi karenge, to ye ho jayega, and nobody's going to ask them, well, were you sleeping for the last 6 months? And what about that line of evidence that comes to you, and where are the numbers, and so on and so forth. So I think that we have, we set the government up to fail. And what happens as a result? What happens is that political links are furthered by patronage, and the elite prosper as a result of this. The rich-poor divide is augmented, and reforms are held hostage. So every time there's a right policy in place, there's a committed individual, you try and you get it to a certain level. And then the next person is going to come and totally dismantle it and throw it out of the window, and there will be no accountability of the damages done in the process. So some fundamental things have to change. Unless there's meaningful accountability of a decision maker, unless you pay attention to conflict of interest. A lot of times I've seen people in the cabinet come and present the justification for exporting sugar and importing sugar and taking subsidies in the process, people that have deep conflict of interest. They're absolutely loath to signing conflict of interest statements. So there are some of these simple things that the private sector does for its survival, for its sustainability, for it to be effective, that we completely disregard in the public sector. And I have heard a lot of people talk about reform as though reform and institutional restructuring will do the trick. A few days ago, I was at a NUST event where somebody talked endlessly about how a unicameral system will take care of all the ills of this country. I don't think it will take care of any ill. The problems that this country faces, the problem of decision making, are linked to the lack of accountability, the way we've nurtured arbitrariness, the manner in which we favor bureaucrats with political leanings, the total lack of commitment to conflict of interest, the absolute lack of attention to evidence. And I think these are the things that are the invisible things that need to change for things to work, as Miftah says.
Okay, so this is one of the smartest rooms I've been in for a while. And before this talk, I asked a few of my friends and also more publicly for people to suggest questions. And there's a bigger list than we'll ever get through. But one thing, before I open up, I'll try and make most of the rest of this time open for questions. But one question I want to sink our teeth into before we go to that is why some what seem to be fairly obvious win-win sort of ideas have not taken off. One of which is greater financial inclusion. So we've seen, and this is obviously relevant both to the finance ministry and to the Ehsaas, and in the sense of being involved with NADRA in keeping track of both needs and sort of the population as a whole, and rolling out microtransactions. So the question is, to both of you, is why haven't recent governments, both of your governments, been more aggressive in rolling out digital microtransactions? So Miftah Sahab, if we need loans, imagine if we were to take loans directly from the citizenry, right? And instead of going through banks as an intermediary. Sania Sahiba, the infrastructure which would allow, for example, a mobile phone to serve as a bank account, and for people to be able to transact more. So I guess perhaps I can start with you in terms of the infrastructure, and then I'll come to Miftah Sahab.
So I can tell you what we did in Ehsaas, what the roadmap was, how further we were along in that trajectory, and where the process was halted. So basically, in Ehsaas, we had 6 time-bound outcome-based goals. And one of that 6 time-bound outcome-based goals was financial inclusion of 7 million individuals, 100% women. That was a goal that we espoused, we articulated in black and white, and in Ehsaas we had a delivery unit. We used to monitor the progress towards that goal. The programmatic intervention which was tailored to achieve that goal was called the One Woman, One Account, the Ehsaas One Woman, One Account initiative, and there was a 2-phased approach to implementing that. In phase 1, we contracted 2 banks through a competitive process, Habib Bank and Bank Al Falah. And the unconditional cash transfer, which were done through BISP, under the Ehsaas umbrella, transformed into payments through digital wallets. And we, 2020 onwards, after we were through with the COVID payments, around December 2020, we opened the wallets for all the women. The uptake was not very high. Because these are very poor people and very few of them saved. So we thought, how are we going to nudge them towards digital payments? And there was a 2-prong approach that we then institutionalized. The first, those 2 prongs were supposed to talk to each other. The first prong of that approach was leveraged RAST, which is the micropayment gateway of the central bank. And there's a long dossier of correspondence and meeting minutes and strategy papers, which articulate how Ehsaas was meant to transition toward UNRWA, which essentially at the front end would have meant any woman in the nearest bank would go and open a bank account, and we would have the ability to throw money in her wallet, in her account. Because otherwise, in phase one, we were bound to the 2 contracted banks. So that was the first prong. The second prong was the infrastructure which digitized Kiryana merchants. Because unless you digitized the Kiryana end, what are they going to transact with? So we had a program called Ehsaas Ration Riayat, which served 2 purposes. Number one, it was programmed to target subsidies, and on the other hand, it was an ecosystem of digitizing the Kiryana merchants, which at some point would allow these women with bank accounts to wear towards digital payments. When our government left, or should I say when our government was ousted, 80% of the delivery on Ehsaas's first 4-year strategy was complete, and everything is in black and white and on delivery unit dashboards, which included significant progress both towards Ehsaas Ration Riayat and the One Woman, One Account initiative, phase 2 with the micropayment gateway of the central bank. And then, of course, things got discontinued. These days, I'm braving the motorway and GT road a lot to come and get that ecosystem up and running in Punjab. And who knows where the government will be. But so long as I have the time span to
after you now.
So long as I have the time span to get this institutionalized, I will try my best. The point I'm trying to make is that digital payments and financial inclusion through that ecosystem and the institutionalization of that is not just a question of policy, regulation, setting up the system. You have to roll out a number of programmatic interventions in tandem, and then you have to incentivize that ecosystem. And I hope that if I have a couple of more months, we will turn around the first iteration of this ecosystem. Punjab Ehsaas Ration Riayat has already commenced. And Ehsaas bank accounts for women in Punjab, hopefully, God willing, will be rolled out soon.
Right, Mr. Saab, and perhaps the first mic can go to Murtaza Saab, and he can also chime in from the bank. But on financial inclusion.
Actually, I think I'll just let Murtaza speak, but I'll just say 2 things. One is that, I've seen this Ration Riayat program that actually is a very, very well thought out and very well engineered program. It really was. It seemed almost it had not come from PTI. It was so well engineered. But having said this, that was just a joke. But it was seriously a very well engineered, very well conceived program. But my larger issue with this is that it's really not the federal government's job to do this. And the federal government, one of the things we talked about, you and I both talked about, giving too much money to the provinces and provinces not being accountable and all that. But the fact of the matter is that when you had the NFC and when you have the 18th Amendment, and you did away with the concurrent list, the federal government actually never pared down its own ministries. It never actually fired a single bureaucrat. So the environment ministry, because now you're not supposed to call it environment, you started calling it climate change. Because you're not legally allowed to call your ministry agriculture because that's a devolved subject, you now call it food security. So you actually not gave away the stuff. So fine, cash transfers, up to cash transfers I understand. But for Ration Riayat or the education money and all that stuff, that's really a province's job and even perhaps local government's job, and it's really not the job of the federal government, given its very, very acutely limited resources to do this. That's actually money that the provinces should be giving rather than giving jobs to teachers who are not literate.
Right, but the payment infrastructure has to come from the central bank,
That's
which is under the federal.
yeah.
Murtaza, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about where we are with mobile banking.
Actually, all I'll say, Ali, is that my soul has already been sucked out, so it's too late. But seriously, I mean, I think people are here to hear, the two honorable panelists. We can talk about this bilaterally.
All right, thank you.
But just to clarify, Miftah, 65% of the resource allocation for Ehsaas Ration Riayat when it was run federally came from the provinces. And the idea was that they would then embrace it fully, which has happened in Punjab. And I hope that, because a lot of thought has gone into designing it, so I hope that the other provinces will follow.
I mean, not to get into politics, but I mean, KP then asked for this money back when I came and all that stuff. But,
not to get into politics, but we're getting into politics.
No. But the point is, my point is larger, that whether it's any government, I mean, you have to define what something what provinces should do and what federal government should be doing, and giving cheaper rations to people, or as admirable as it is, or educating children, as admirable as it is, should not be the job of the federal government.
So I had a whole host of other things to talk about, a lot of which were questions from other people in this room. Let's open this up, and perhaps others can start with this lady over here first.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ifram Khan, and I'm an analyst at SERP. First of all, Dr. Sania, I'm a big fan of yours. I think you've done absolutely amazing work in the Ehsaas program that we as a country are very grateful for. My question is for Dr. Ismail. You listed a lot of things that are wrong with the government. I'm sorry. You listed a lot of things that the government is incapable of doing. You mentioned PIAS and ZPL and so many other things. But you yourself have been a part of the government. So if you, as a former member of the government, say that the government is incapable of doing this stuff, then what hope does the common person have? And my second question is that you've mentioned so many things that are not the prerogative of the federal government. So if, the federal government is incapable of doing so much stuff, then why did you guys struggle so hard to get the federal government up around, say, Sindh ki government chalate, to phir, what is the whole point?
You don't have to answer that second question. We agreed this won't be political. You can ask that bilaterally. And let's collect a few other questions before Fareed.
I'm Ehsaas. I'm mechanical engineer from Nust University, having masters in energy engineering. My question is with Miftah Saab. As we all know that we have circular debt, which is a black hole, and in the morning we have been told by Dr. Hafiz Pasha that around rupees 1,200 billion is our circular debt of power sector. So before you were coming in the ministry, you said as we have installed 40,000 megawatt of power, and our peak demand in summers is 25,000 megawatt, and in winters is 10,000 megawatt. So we have surplus electricity. There are two ways to deal that surplus electricity. One is to go as per global transition to electric vehicles and sell that electricity to our EV transport, and we have EV policy 2030, we have to go 30% EVs. And the other thing is that, as you promised, Miftah Sahab, that you will sell electricity at lower tariff, 9 rupees a tariff. So how do you respond? What hold you back?
All right, and we'll take one more question, then I'll give the Fareed, please. Right here.
Thank you, Ali. I'm Fareed. Quick question, thoda sa technical hai. In the sense that I want to ask, there are more than a dozen people in the room who can come up with excellent policies to grow Pakistan. Lekin at the end of the day, politicians ne implement karni hai wo policy. So incentive compatibility kahin nazar nahi aa rahi hai. Agar politician का इंसेंटिव है री-इलेक्ट होना, और अगर उसकी री-इलेक्शन की बेसिस उसकी परफॉर्मेंस नहीं है, उसकी री-इलेक्शन की बेसिस अपीजमेंट है कुछ इंस्टीट्यूशंस की या एलीट की, तो ये इंसेंटिव कंपैटिबिलिटी कैसे डेवलप होगी? और आई थिंक यू बोथ ऑफ यू कैन आंसर इट हैविंग बीन इन द गवर्नमेंट. How do you think incentive compatibility is going to evolve within this structure?
Okay, can I start with this question? There was a book called Congress, the Electoral Connection. It was 90-some pages of political science monograph. It really changed the way people used to think about US Congress. And in that monograph, this guy, I forget the author's name, talked about how every congressman only just wanted to, or congressman only wanted to win elections, and the US Congress election, the House is elected every 2 years. And so they came up with this pork barrel politics about bringing projects to their districts, which is what PSDP and ADB are, basically bringing projects to their district. They also do this thing. So politicians, you talked about appeasement to an idara and all that stuff, and that's also in true. But in Pakistan, and I don't know whether you've started believing this now or since 2018, depends on your political affiliation, because some of us actually believed it then also. But the fact of the matter is that everywhere in the world, politicians do try to do stuff for their constituents to get their votes. This is not unique to Pakistan, and that's how it is. But there are other countries, some are democracies, some are non-democracies, that somehow grow. We have not been able to do this. India is a democracy. It's not a perfect democracy. It's a very difficult democracy. But somehow it does grow faster than Pakistan. Bangladesh is not a democracy in the conventional sense, but still also growing faster than Pakistan. So there must be something here different than just that. I mean, it's very easy to point out to elections or this or that, but you have to go a little bit deeper than to this. I don't really know the answer to why we are not governing. What you asked, Beta, was why did I join the government if I thought the government doesn't work? That is the reason why I would join the government, right? What else? I mean, this is the only country I have, right? So if I think that the government doesn't work, this is my job as part of this privileged society, the privileged elites, as part of, God has been very kind to me, so somehow try and do something for my country. And having worked in the government, in Punjab government, in the federal government, and work at a quite senior level, I've now realized, and especially if you look at it, that our government doesn't work. And if people who disagree would show me statistics of other countries that have done worse than us, right? If Bangladesh is doing better than you, India is doing better than you, I mean, Sri Lanka's GDP is actually 50% more than you. The only country, okay, let me put it this way. For a child born in South Asia, if he's born in Nepal, his chance of living to the age of 5 is higher. If he's born in Maldives, his chance of living to the age of 5 is higher. The lowest chance he has of living to age 5 is in Pakistan. There must be something wrong with our government, right? So that's the point. Then coming to the first question you asked, I've heard in every session, so I think somebody who knows a little bit more about electricity has probably hopefully answered that. You asked me why was I not able to make the electricity cheaper? I don't want to give you a political answer, so I'll give you an honest answer. Although I could easily say that LNG nahi kharida tha inhone, but I will not say this. And that's a politician, The thing is that you have to understand the context. Pakistan, and I will say this, that when in PMLN in 2013 and 2014, when PMLN 2013 and 14 was trying to put up power plants in Pakistan, and we put up not 25,000, 40,000, 25,000 megawatts. There was one economist sitting here, Ali Chima, who said, can Pakistan afford to have zero load shedding? Okay? Think about this. Pakistan in winter demands only 10,000 megawatts. In the summer, our demand one day was actually 31,000 megawatts. You actually need more than twice, almost 3 times as much power in the summer as you do in winter, which means that half the year, 2/3 of your power plants will be shut down, which means that 2/3 of the time you will be paying rents on this or capacity payments on this for no reason at all. So can a poor country like Pakistan afford to have 100% power? That's the question. When I was in government, and I'll be very honest with you, I was the one minister who would say, thodi load shedding badha do. I mean, seriously. I would say, ek din chutti kar do. Because, if you're spending $3 billion importing oil, $3 billion that you don't have, then frankly speaking, we can't afford to. Up to khair, the oil is cheaper, but when your oil is $110, we can't afford to do power every home in Pakistan. If 3 days ago, the price in UK for electricity was £2 per unit. So because of all the stuff that's happening, power has become so expensive. We have to also understand that giving continuous power is a very worthwhile goal. it is a worthwhile goal, certainly to industries, but if because it's a desperately poor country, maybe sometimes a little load shedding, is something in these trying economic times is the right answer.
So on the question of implementation and the lack of incentives to focus on that once you're in government, I think that's a real challenge, because there is no reward for effective implementation. And the minute you get into government, you have a schizophrenic role. You have to put on your partisan hat and think about the next election, and that's a very different discourse and conversation. It's a different set of priorities that drive that. You are working towards very different endpoints, very different approaches. But implementation is a science. It requires diligence and hard work and detail and discipline and follow-up and rigor. There's no incentive for that. Which is why I strongly feel that unless in this system where you ultimately have to go for vote every 5 years, you have to have some kind of accountability of the person who's the decision maker. When you take over from someone, there should be a set of metrics signed. When you leave, there should be a proper handover. There should be some accountability of what you've delivered, and some appetite.
You'll need to.
And an appetite, at the level of the public to hold decision makers accountable for performance at that level. Right now, I hardly watch the television, but there's hardly any discourse around that. There's a particular policy. How did it cascade into implement? Was the policy right or wrong? How did it cascade into implementation? How was it evaluated? Who was responsible? If there were 3 hands changing, how well or how badly did they do? There's no discourse of this kind. And hence, the whole discourse veers towards partisan power play.
Can I just say this? Just make it just very short. Seriously, I with all due respect, this accountability part really I disagree with it. The best accountability is through the ballot box. Let the voters vote. When I go out and when I leave, who's going to do an accountability? We have to be very careful, because in our system, as this young man just said, there are other idaras, and I don't want the other idaras to come and do my accountability. I've actually suffered 5 months in a NAB jail. I know what I'm talking about. Okay?
But let me clarify that when I say accountability, I don't mean the politically motivated witch hunt, which accountability is seen to be synonymous with in this country. That's not what accountability is. Accountability means that you have clear metrics, you have a clear roadmap with regard to delivery towards that metrics, and you have answerability. And that's clearly not synonymous with what Miftah is talking about.
So can I just ask that, in the interest of time, if you'll go around, take 2 questions here and 2 over there, and then, go ahead.
Hello.
And keep them brief, please.
Okay. So I've heard you guys say again and again about corruption and accountability and how we need someone external to come in and look after whatever they've been doing. But I just like to point out that most of the time that's not very possible, since that's just an added department you'll have to look after, you'll have to pay, and that is not the responsibility you want. So, and it's really easy to throw it out there that there's corruption, there's certain individuals involved and whatnot. Every political party will come and say it. Obviously, not everyone's going to be motivated enough to work for the country.
Great. Thank you.
Can I quickly?
No, why don't I just go around, please, because we're almost out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you both for joining us today. And since we are talking about inclusivity in development, one thing that I think we did not talk about is tax. And I think one of the main reasons we are in this cyclical dip is because we do not have enough tax revenue generation and a big tax net. So And main reason for that could be that we don't have a good fiscal capacity or control on our executives, which is something that we do see in Scandinavian countries or welfare countries. So how do you think we could have realistic and effective interventions that could improve our tax revenue, which could then fund our development programs such as Ehsaas and other many programs? And second question I have is that...
No second question. In the interest of equity, we have to go to that gentleman there.
Waqas Paracha, PFM advisor, Oxford Policy Management. My question is that the post-18th amendment, every provincial government is bound to have a PFC award. But since then, KP is the only government which is issuing PFC award. This year, this was the 14th PFC award, although the funds were not ring-fenced. But why other provincial governments are not issuing PFC award?
That's a great question. Can go to the gentleman in the back, please. And that's the last question.
Hello. So I'm Faiz Gilani, currently pursuing a master's in economics from UCL. My question is that everyone talked about development and industry and everything, but there's a pivotal issue right now about how ports are not clearing containers, etc., and that leads to demurrage and other costs. Currently, because I belong to a family that's in manufacturing and interest, so the actual demurrages and the cost that they have to incur is actually more than the actual value of the containers. So isn't that a sucker punch for such manufacturing companies? Because not only you're not getting the stuff that you order, but also you have to pay excessive to governments. And why doesn't the government support them or like take away the cost that they have to give? Because it's not their fault that...
Got it. We got your question.
Thank you. Those are 4 great questions. Dr. Savi, you want to?
So on the question about corruption, I did not, by any stretch of imagination, indicate that we need new institutions to tackle the problem. If you look at international evidence, it's very loud and clear about what you need to address and what you need to strengthen to address corruption. And I'm not talking about a politically motivated punitive approach. You know, to address corruption, you're looking at prevention, and then, of course, the 2 other dimensions. So the international evidence tells us that robust supreme audit institutions, and the Office of the Auditor General is the equivalent of that in our system. So robustness, transparency, independence, and answerability of the supreme audit institutions in any polity is the best guard against corruption, number 1. The second is procurement reforms. The third is public finance management. And the fourth, in terms of strength of evidence, is rigorous budget planning. You'd be surprised, in the government system, it is default to take post facto approvals for budgets that was spent 4 years ago, which creates a lot of distortion. So that is what the international evidence tells you. These reforms are invisible, they're transparent, they don't get you any political brownie points. They are extremely unpopular at the cabinet level. But this is what needs to be done. But more broadly, with my own practical experience, basically adherence to rules, governance by the book, checks and balances, you know, hiring according to what paper says, you know, strict adherence to procurement rules as they are, transparency. These are the simple things you can do even in the absence of big ticket reforms. And of course the use of technology for greater transparency in what you do. Of course the PFC award the KP government has done, it could have been much better, because there is part of what they have bucketed into that, not the entire budget. And of course it's a good question as to why the other provinces don't do it. That is what I referred to in my opening remarks as well. And I leave it to Miftah to address the tax question. I think our direct taxation is about 20%. The rest is all indirect, and that contributes hugely to the inequality agenda.
So the question about the tax, Dr. Sahaba is right that our direct tax is very low. I think about 40% is what we call direct tax, but about 80-90% of that is actually also indirect tax because it's actually withholding. So real income tax collection from companies is very little in Pakistan. I tried to put an income tax. For instance, there are 2.2 million shops in Pakistan because they have electricity meters. 17 lakh in the NTDC system and 5 lakh in the K electric system. And I put a tax of 3,000 rupees a month. By mistake, because if you're not registered, the tax is doubled, but we could have easily addressed that by one line. 3,000 rupees to a taxpayer means, to a shopkeeper means per month is 100 rupees a month, 36,000 rupees a year, which presumes that you will actually have an income of maybe 3 to 4 lakh rupees in Pakistan. If you have a salary income of 3.5 lakh rupees, then you pay 36,000 rupees in tax. So that's a presumption that you make, and I think that's a reasonable presumption. In fact, I would say that's actually more than a generous presumption. And yet, I was not able to, stick it. And so there's some mindset we need to actually try and tax people. I mean, everybody talks about a good budget when there are no taxes. I put tax 10% super tax on some banks and companies and all that, and people said, "Un logon ko kyun nahi leke aate jo tax net mein nahi hai?" मैं कहा कौन सा बैंक है जो टैक्स नेट में नहीं है तो बैंकों के ऊपर ही 10% लगाया ना सो द थिंग इज दैट there is one misconception I want to disabuse you guys of. There is not a lot of people out there who don't pay tax, who are very well off and who have no cover. Everybody in Pakistan has a cover. Either it's an agriculture income cover, or it's a hawala cover, or whatever, but everybody has a cover, so there is not a lot of people who we can go and grab because you have not paid taxes. Everybody figures out something. And in fact, at different levels, people do pay taxes, but we need to increase more income tax, which we have not done, but we need to enforce this. And in fact, I think that we need to rely less on custom tariffs and more on income tax. जहाँ तक बेटा आपने सवाल पूछा है freight का, again, Murtaza Sayyid Saab from the State Bank is here. Murtaza, why aren't you giving him the dollars that he wants? Sell him at 265 at the market rate, yaar. Khatam karo, bech do usko. Huh? He actually, better listen to this. No, I mean just look. When the State Bank first came up with this in May, came up with a circular. People also gamed the system. I'll be very honest with you. We said that you cannot import without LC, and you cannot import without our permission on contracts and all that stuff. But people continued to do this. They continued to do this. We actually said that you cannot bring cars on this baggage thing, but they continued to do this. I think 300 or 1,200 or some cars were at the ports. What were we supposed to do? We said you cannot bring. They still brought it. So then we obviously charged some penalty and then let them in. So sometimes people are also gaming the system. I think that if LCs, the State Bank is not stopping for very long. So if somebody's brought in goods from within LC, I think that you'll probably be able to get it. And Murtaza Saab will meet you at tea afterwards.
So when you set yourself an agenda as broad as fostering inclusive development, you'll always walk away from a conversation thinking there was so much more to talk about, and I'm sure that's true for just about everyone here. Nonetheless, it's also sort of a fantastic opportunity for us to have two leading representatives of parties that are often at loggerheads meet for a mostly apolitical conversation and to really think about how we can collectively develop Pakistan further. Thank you very much, both Dr. Ismail, Dr. Nishtar, for being here, and thank you all.